English translation 888th contact Tuesday, the 21st of May 2024, 006 hours.
Oh, there you are already. Welcome to my lair. Greetings, and I am glad you are here.
I am also pleased. Apparently you were in good health.
Yes, I have been a bit indisposed.
We realize that. Because all three of us were here, but then when we looked for you and found you in the living room.
Yes, I was asleep then, and also did not hear any of you telephoning from the office looking for me. Madeleine then picked up the phone and informed me. Unfortunately, my health was so bad that I did not go into the office. Ava was also not there. She was in Pfäffikon, so I could not inform her.
That was no big deal. We came here together because the three of us had the following in mind, and
The fact that you can sort everything out together in such a wise way solves your problem in a way that could not be better.
That is why.
yes, Enjana, Bermunda, and I.
Then it is all good. And for all three of you to come here together, I suppose Quetzal is the watch commander at your station.
Yes, because we always have to keep it manned by at least one person, but you know that.
Yes, of course, it was daft of me to ask. But what do you think about the fact that Putin, should I say?
What did Svath say then, should you, Enjana? Yes, what did he say?
He said that he was leaving it up to me, and that I should decide according to how I could then assess the situation myself. If it according to whether, and if I think so, then it is not exactly rosy at the moment, so I would probably better keep quiet, as I have done so far.
You do not act rashly, I know that, so decide according to what your mind and reason tell you to do.
Then I will keep quiet.
You will certainly do the correct thing by doing so.
I also think so. One thing I have to tell you now, Edward, is that I do not want to watch any more of the horrific events we saw together in the war in the Middle East, which were much worse than what we saw in Ukraine. Yes, I already know it was too much for me. The many innocent prisoners from the population who were not even Hamas fighters, but who were nevertheless maltreated by the Israeli military and blindfolded and tied naked to beds, or otherwise squatting on the floor tied with blindfolds, etc., who were also mistreated and
Everything else that came up, I know it was just too much for you. In future, I will only arrange Quetzal because I have seen how everything became too much for you every time. Unfortunately, large parts of the government and the population are biased and do not want to see that war crimes are being committed on all sides, especially by the Israeli military and Netanyahu, who wants to organize a genocide in Palestine with the help of America and its senile President Biden.
regarding the re-emergence of anti-Semitism, that is to say worldwide Jew hatred. What you predicted has come true frighteningly exactly, with you explicitly naming the two war criminals Zelensky and Netanyahu, as well as America, who are causally responsible for it.
Yes, I know, but there is no point in going on about it. So let us drop it. I also have something here, namely regarding the rune signs. Manuel Brettbacher has emailed me 2 enlargements of the Rune of Death, which has been crazily distributed worldwide since 1958 as an alleged symbol of peace, but which does not symbolize peace, but death, murder, and destruction, and thus associates strife, evil, hatred, revenge, retribution, discord, enmity, war, power play, rebellion, terror and violence of all kinds, etc. So Manuel emailed me the rune death symbol in 2 following forms. So this is one version, which contains both the life sign, but also the death rune, which still has some stuff written underneath, but which has been cut off a bit on its left side.
But it is still decipherable, consequently everything can be read.
Indeed it is, and it is really good to read.
It is, without a doubt.
Good! Then here is the other one, which was probably taped to a street lamp post as a page.
But it also shows explanatorily what it means.
That is probably good and correct. But the Earthlings must first be made aware of it in detail, as also that this symbol of death has caused so much mischief since 1958, and thus its existence alone, as has never happened before in terms of time. That is to say, in only 66 years, during the time of 5.4 billion years since the Earth has existed. Through the irresponsible work, manipulation, destruction, impairment, annihilation and extermination, and other mischief of all kinds that has been brought upon the Earth, the planet itself, all ecosystems in the entire natural world and its fauna and flora by Earth humanity in just 66 years. And let it be said again, in just 66 years. Since this rune of death, that is to say this symbol of death, was and is being spread, it surpasses anything that has ever occurred in nature. The human being's lousy and irresponsible, selfish, domineering work alone, through his insane religious and worldly believing bogus thinking, which in good conscience can be described as bogus thinking, has brought about this irresponsible, catastrophic and all-encompassing destruction of all species worldwide. Many billions of Earthlings worldwide have, in boundless selfishness, greed, lust for power, revenge, arrogance, irresponsibility, arrogance, hatred, retaliation, and craving for recognition, etc., effectively led the entire Earth to near destruction in just 66 years since 1958. And this is no longer very far away in its final form, and will soon be so close that it can no longer be stopped unless understanding and reason finally come into play, and everything changes rapidly. Not just for the better, but effectively for the good and correct, and this is actually undertaken with serious awareness. Only by dismantling or reducing humanity on a large scale, namely by a worldwide and massive stop to the birth rate, reducing humanity to such an extent that ultimately the population appropriate to the planet is only 500 million, can everything return to a state that is appropriate to the Earth. But if idiots, such as the National Counselor, who I will talk about in a moment when I have finished talking about the death rune, and idiots reject a birth freeze and work against it in any way, then all hope and malt is lost. This is also the case if the global, selfish, and power-hungry authorities are left at work and are not replaced by righteous leaders. That is what I have to say. But I also have to say with regard to the rune of death that we of the Figu have the true and correct sign of peace that has existed since time immemorial, handed down by Nocademian, in safekeeping, and have been using and disseminating it for years. Recently, we Figuans want to and will do this on a large scale and spread it worldwide in various ways and make it known, so that human beings can finally strive for true peace on Earth, instead of hatred, war, discord, and terror as with the death symbol, so that ultimately no more military murderer organizations can rule the world and peoples, which can no longer bring death and destruction, hardship and misery, hatred, revenge, violence, torture, discord, destruction, and evil ruin upon humanity and the Earth. Now I would like to explain what the runes actually are, what they look like, and what they mean. The following is how it is listed on the internet, which I reproduce here as an excerpt, with minimal changes that are not significant.
Use of runes in the right-wing scene Brandenburg State Center for Political Education.
Runes are the oldest Germanic characters. They are still used today in various contexts. This article deals with the appropriation of the characters under National Socialism and their use in the right-wing scene today. With the Völkisch glorification of Germanic culture, the National Socialists, that is to say the Nazis, rediscovered the runes, which had been displaced by Latin script, and saw these characters as an important component of Aryan culture. The runic script was intended to demonstrate the alleged superiority of the Nordic race. One form, Fraktur script, is still seen as a particularly German script in the so-called right-wing scene today, although it was banned in the Third Reich in 1941 as Jewish script. The runic alphabet, called Futhark after the first series of letters, underwent changes over time, both in terms of the number of characters and also their form and naming. Sig rune of the many runes that have survived from Germanic times, only a few were actually used and instrumentalized by the Nazis. The best known is the Sig rune as a symbol of the Deutsches Jungvolk DJ and, as a double Sig rune, also a symbol of the Schutzstaffel SS of the NSDAP. Both are banned in Germany. The origin of the section Sig rune is disputed. It probably corresponds to the Sawulo rune, also known as the Sol rune, as a symbol for the sun. Double Sig rune of the SS. The SS used the double Sig rune in their insignia and thus appropriated the aggressive dynamic form lightning bolt and the association with the word victory. In addition to the Sig rune, right-wing extremists today mainly use the Odal, Othila, and the life or death rune Algiz. The life and death runes are often used to mark corresponding birth and death dates. There are also symbols derived from original runes, for example, the so-called wolf's fishing rod. The Blood and Honor group, which has been banned since September 2000, used in particular a symbol reminiscent of Triskele, reminiscent of a modified three-armed swastika. However, the use of these signs is only punishable if they give the impression to an unbiased third party that they are the distinctive signs of a banned organization. Right-wing extremists also frequently use a form of writing similar to runes to emphasize the pagan Germanic origins of the German people and draw a line of tradition to their own supposed Germanism. Another typeface that is sometimes used in right-wing extremist circles today is Fracter. This font was common in German-speaking countries from the 16th to the beginning of the 20th century.
I'm not familiar with these characters.
Neither am I, but I find them interesting.
I can also say that about myself.
The runes I learned from Svath are really impressive and do not simply go back to the ancient Germanic peoples, as is claimed by clever know-it-alls of science, because these signs were a secret means of communication, and therefore a secret for the majority of peoples, he explained. They later became the actual letters of an alphabet that was used by various ancient peoples in different forms, with the oldest known runic forms becoming common as writing in Scandinavia. These runes, as they are not recorded here very precisely according to ancient specifications, were each drawn slightly differently by different peoples, as they were originally invented in contact with various writing cultures. The ancient Latin alphabet of the Romans later served as a partial model, but the runes were not originally created independently. Nor were they adopted purely by the Germanic tribes as a finished writing system, and they were also later modeled independently on Mediterranean scripts. However, they were created very early on in various forms as a complete alphabet with 24 letters, although the runic characters we know today have been preserved. However, these runes were invented in their original form as symbols of means of communication with certain values, but were later reevaluated as symbols of various values, such as the beginning of life, whereby the runic sign Z Algiz, or Algiz, was designated as a symbol as a life rune, and magical powers and protective functions, as well as trustworthiness, etc., were attributed to it. The reversal of the rune form, that is to say the symbol Algiz Z to the form of the QU as a so-called death rune and as an interpretation of the end of life, did not exist in the runic alphabet, as this was not actually created until 1958 with the alleged peace symbol, which is in fact a death symbol and destruction symbol by the British artist Gerald Holtham for opponents of nuclear war and their first major peace march in London. However, the inverted, that is to say, overturned form year had already been misused by the National Socialists as a rune of death. But as I said, this gave rise to the worldwide use of the death symbol, which is still known today and is associated with enmity, death, destruction, hatred, discord, annihilation, and destruction, through the mental and intellectual disorientation of the artist Gerald Holtham in 1958. But now I want to say the following with something I wrote with the following title.
Pathological low intelligence.
Morbidly insane low intelligence, that is to say, a thus disturbed and degenerated sense of reality and truth, prevails among countless human beings in all countries on earth, who can call neither intellect nor reason their own and who stumble around fatalistically and uselessly in existence as non-thinking idiots with illusory thoughts. And this also happens in countries where there is a good school education, but which is only seemingly absorbed and learnt by the pseudo-thinkers, as a result of which they remain as lowly intelligent and simple-minded as bean straw. The following is the best example of how in this country, that is to say in Switzerland, such insane and unrealistic bogus thinkers and therefore stubborn non-thinking idiots, who vegetate fatalistically, are published in a well-known Swiss daily newspaper by a green, probably completely green behind the ears, naive national councillor, who, along with her publisher and editors etc., obviously also only insane and irresponsible bogus thinkers, are obviously also just crazy and irresponsible bogus thinkers and publicly write in the newspaper in a morbidly intelligent way, somewhat freely rephrased by me, but in keeping with the content of the newspaper article, something like, Swiss married couples are having fewer and fewer children. The birth rate in Switzerland is falling to an all-time low. Researchers are concerned and believe that Switzerland is facing major demographic problems as a result of this trend. The question is, what are the reasons for this and what should Switzerland do about this sharp decline in birth rates? It should be known, it is summarized, that it is significantly more difficult for mothers in Switzerland to return to work after giving birth compared to other countries in Europe. In addition, the National Councillor says with regard to daycare places, parental leave and day schools etc., the offers regarding a real balance between professional and parental life are insufficient or simply not possible. There is a lack of daycare centers, particularly in some regions. The costs that families have to bear have a particularly deterrent effect. At CHF 130 per day, Switzerland is the world leader. High costs force many families to question whether it is even worthwhile for a woman to return to work. This extremely poor starting position also has an effect on the birth rate, etc., she writes, adding that the Confederation, that is to say the government in Bern, is doing nothing to stop the decline in birth rates. With a headline that reads something like what human beings can do to ensure that more children are born and something like what should we do to combat the decline in birth rates. This requires more effective programs for families. And because the federal government is not acting in this regard, it is up to the people themselves to take matters into their own hands. Etc. The fact that the federal government, that is to say the government in Bern, that is to say the state authorities, should now get their fingers into the idiotic game of more childbirth, is much more than just ill-considered and idiotic thinking and saying, because this speech is evidence of complete lack of understanding and complete unreasonableness. But such completely brainless, unrighteous and irresponsible elements are sitting in government in Switzerland as national councillors and other pathologically stupid people etc., whereby they hinder and mislead the righteous in the state leadership in doing right and leading the country and the people correctly through nasty and possibly religiously faith-based influences. In this way, a crazy national councillor hopes that the Confederation will issue directives to discourage childbearing in order to bring about more births. This is complete idiocy, even though there is already an 18-fold overpopulation on Earth, as a result of which more than 72% of all nature and its fauna and flora have already been destroyed, annihilated and, for the most part, completely and irrevocably wiped out. Every year, around 60,000 of all genera and species of fauna and flora, that is to say animals, creatures and other self-propelled life forms and plants, from the smallest to the largest, are wiped out completely irresponsibly, and for the most part, solely through the fault of human beings. Behind the whole idea that the federal government should be responsible for increasing the number of childbirths, there is also the fact that all this costs a lot of money, because every child born in Switzerland costs a lot of money until it reaches adulthood, namely an average of around CHF 800 per month. This is in addition to the fact that you also have to pay taxes to the state. This means that many parents quickly find themselves in a tight spot and need financial help from the state, and this is of course at the expense of taxpayers. This requires more and more government spending, which in turn has to be paid for by taxpayers. And this spending is increasing all the time because, despite the outrageously high taxes, they are still not high enough to pay for everything the state has to do. So taxpayers are fleeced even more, for example also with stamp duties, as well as with official signature fees, authorization fees, etc., so that even more good donations can be flushed abroad, whereby the rulers of foreign states can stuff themselves full of wealth, but the poor in Switzerland can gnaw on hunger pangs, as is also the case in all countries around the earth. This is in addition to the fact that taxpayers still have to raise billions of dollars to buy weapons and other pointless material for murder for a completely pointless army, all of which is sold abroad by Switzerland, which may then be used for murder and destruction in uprisings and wars. This violates Switzerland's neutrality, as irresponsible elements of Switzerland's government also do elsewhere without hesitation, who are protected by their fellow rulers and go unpunished instead of these miscreants being fired from office. Some of the Swiss army's many expensive acquisitions are later sold abroad when they are no longer needed or become obsolete, and may then be used for war purposes and thus for mass murder. This is how Swiss government officials in Bern interfere absolutely and completely irresponsibly in foreign wars and, for example, once again make a mockery of Switzerland's neutrality by wanting to revoke the refugee status of those refugees from Ukraine who have fled from there and are seeking protection in Switzerland because they rightly decide not to go to war to protect their own lives and thus do not want to lose their lives to war killings. By withdrawing refugee status from such human beings and forcing them to leave Switzerland to go to war in their home country, Switzerland is effectively condemning them to death. This is despite the fact that the death penalty was abolished in Switzerland in the last century, although, as many Swiss citizens probably do not realize, it was still in force until 1942. It was only then that this legally authorized murder became a prohibition of the death penalty and was also enshrined in the Swiss Criminal Code in 1942 during the World War. However, the death penalty, which was used several times during the last World War from 1939 to 1945, remained in the Military Criminal Code for even longer, and was also enshrined until 1992. It was not until 2000 that it was finally banned by the Constitution. Unscrupulous elements of the Swiss government have not only adopted sanctions from the EU dictatorship and shamefully applied them against a foreign country, in this case Russia, but now also want to indirectly interfere in the rather nasty war in Ukraine, which was secretly and deceitfully provoked by America, as was the whole war in the first place, without the permission of the neutral people. And the fact that Switzerland is now playing a part in this, precisely by denying the Ukrainian refugees refugee status, and thereby forcing them to be sent back to Ukraine as cannon fodder, and inevitably handed over to death, is already mean and inhumane, but once again irresponsible and mean again, making a mockery of Switzerland's neutrality. That is completely irrelevant to those unrighteous, brainwashed and idiots in the government, who are also not really Swiss according to their convictions. But the scum of unrighteousness and such rotten elements sit in government and are able to outdo the righteous in government with their unrighteousness.
That is completely irresponsible. And the fact that a national counselor cultivates an attitude likewise, and can also publish it in media whose editors are quite obviously of the same reprehensible disposition, is incomprehensible to me. Because it should still be recognizable to a human being with very little sense and reason that with such a high overpopulation as prevails on Earth, every single birth expands all conceivable difficulties and consistently recognizes all the existing and consistently solely man-made problems of all impairments. Destruction and devastation of nature and its entire life of the animal and plant world, as well as the planet itself. It is absolutely incomprehensible to me that a person like this woman, who, as you say, is a national counselor, is allowed to occupy a government office, just as it is also completely irresponsible for a reputable daily newspaper to publish such an article as you have here.
This national counselor is a completely irresponsible enfant terrible and should be shot to the moon, said a woman who phoned me about it. Ava already drew my attention to this criminal article, which was published on the 16th of May under the heading Opinions. Effectively, I think the whole thing is really more than just criminal, when you consider that there is already an 18-fold overpopulation on Earth, and that in just 66 years so much of the planet, all ecosystems, nature and its fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere, has been destroyed, thereby also forcing climate change, that the continued existence of humanity is already in question. This is because human beings, through their sheer overpopulation, have caused such damage throughout the world that all hardship and misery, all destruction, annihilation and extinction, has reached such a level that it has surpassed everything else. And this is like nothing that has ever happened before on the same scale and to the same extent in the course of just 66 years since the Earth has existed for around 5.4 billion years, as I have already mentioned. And all of this goes beyond all forbearance and understanding. Furthermore, I want to speak plainly and say what Svath has really taught me, with somewhat more precise details than I have done and given all these years, and simply did not mention and left open the exact dates that Svath gave me, and which contradict those of our fair sciences enormously. For example, the fact that what our earthly scientists spout is simply made up out of thin air and conjecture that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old is simply nonsense, because Svath taught me at the time that the planet Earth was formed around 5.4 billion years ago, and that the first life as tiny bacteria-like single-celled organisms, etc., originated 4.3 million years ago. This while the creatures effectively began to evolve around 45 million years ago, from which the first human-like life forms emerged 12 to 14 million years ago. These then went on to evolve into the first human forms, which emerged worldwide within a few millennia, and not just in Africa, as the scientists stupidly claim, but actually on the giant continents of the entire Earth. I do not know how the idiotic claim that human beings originated in Africa came about, but this nonsense is irrelevant to the truth, and is therefore not important. And Svath certainly knew the effective truth much better, which he obtained as an all-round researcher and always fully active all-round scientist through countless explorations during his 924 years on Earth. Furthermore, I would like to say this. Although I wrote the book, which explains exactly how the sane absolute emerged from the nihilo, and from this the other absolutes, from which the creations, such as ours, ultimately emerged, I did not say anything about how our solar system actually came into being. This is a question that has been asked several times, but which I have never answered. Well, I want to do that now, but I want to say in advance that I do not want to go into it in more detail if I'm asked further, because the whole thing is too far-reaching and so time-consuming that I cannot go into it for that reason alone. However, it should now be explained in a wise way that all the statements and claims of the so-called scientists of astronomy, etc., correspond to nothing but theories when it comes to explaining how, for example, our solar system with the planetary system came into being and actually became the theory that our solar system with all the planets was formed, that is to say, created by the agglomeration of dust, etc., which formed as a result of a supernova and condensed and became a glowing ball, that is to say, the sun, due to the resulting heat, is absolute nonsense. The correctness of the formation of our solar system originally goes back to the event when the sane absolute was created from the nihilo. This was given the ability to create the 6 other absolute forms, the last of which was the absolute absolute, which developed within itself the ability to create creations that were then able to develop independently. Into these, the absolute absolutum incorporated and thus integrated different importance and abilities, which were such that a material belt could develop in the 7-space creation, which the Earthling simply calls the cosmos, which is effectively and truly only the 7th part of the 7 differently dimensioned universes comprising creation in which gaseous matter could develop, and from this ultimately solid and thus dust-like matter. The result of this was that they were able to join together, condense and form structures, from which suns, asteroids, and planets, etc. could be formed. However, this meant that for each sun formation, which very often corresponded to a double sun formation, which is actually the rule, giant formations first emerged, which I will call giant stars, which are many times larger than normal, or also oversized suns. These very hot monster formations are, as Svath explained to me, up to 20 and 30 times larger than the largest normal sun, and only through these, that is to say through their creation and radiation of matter of various kinds, are suns formed. Often, as I said, double suns, which are also formed into planets through further matter, such as asteroids, gases, and dust, etc., and consequently what we call the solar system is created. This also shows that the asteroids contain traces of water, the history of whose formation, which I have to conceal, as Svath instructed me to do. Therefore, when I say that asteroids brought water to Earth, it is to be understood that this did not happen when the planet Earth already existed as such, but that the water was already brought here with asteroids and ultimately with meteors when the Earth originally began to form. And this water was ultimately deposited not only as the seas and other bodies of water we know, as frozen ice masses in the Arctic, Antarctic, and glaciers, but also in the Earth's interior as groundwater and also as bound water in layers of rock. This is actually what I want to explain in response to all the questions that come up again and again, but which I do not find the time to answer because I have more important things to do, and think that answering such questions is not really important, nor is correcting the false theories of narrow-minded and arrogant scientists who believe that they have perfect knowledge and have eaten it with big shovels and want to know everything better than the truth itself anyway. At least that is how I have met many people, although there were only a few in this relationship who did not indulge in this megalomania and also accepted me, even though I do not have a doctorate. Unfortunately, however, know-it-alls among the people who negate everything that is presented are also sometimes quite fanatical, because they are simply right and do not want to admit the effective.
That is unfortunately the case, which fortunately does not appear here on Era, because such behavior is not peculiar to our populations, as is also the case with many other evil, wrong, dangerous, and even humanly abnormal things that the majority of human beings on Earth are guilty of. This, for example, is unfortunately characteristic of the leaders of states on Earth, with very few exceptions who insidiously pursue their secret and criminal endeavors with lies and deceit, and usually also achieve their devious goals. This is the case, for example, with the war in the Middle East, which is being doggedly maintained by Netanyahu, who is acting in blind hatred of the Palestinians. He is using lies and fraudulent claims to wage his war of hate by ostensibly having everything murderous and destructive carried out in order to free hostages, although he is completely indifferent to the hostages. His lying claims effectively correspond only to criminal desires, which I have clearly fathomed in him, which are the real reason for his inciting acts of war and are aimed at fulfilling his hate mania regarding the possibility of bringing about a genocide. That is to say, to achieve the total and complete extermination of the Palestinians. Unfortunately, nothing can be done about this because the people's belief in Netanyahu's lies is stronger than the truth.
Unfortunately, that is the way it is, and it cannot be changed, because if human beings do not begin to learn, decide, and act for themselves, but simply believe, then hops and malt are lost, as we say. No human being can be forced to think, decide, and act correctly and independently, not even if he is forced to do what he is ordered to do under the most severe threats, if he obediently follows orders and does what he is told to do and complies out of fear of punishment. This also applies to the military and war, as human beings are forced to murder, whether they want to or not, because the rulers simply order them from above to do military service and go to war and kill, murder and destroy. But the right thing to do would be for the perpetrators of wars, etc., to have to pay for them themselves, in that the opponents, who instigate all the hatred, discord, strife, and enmity, would have to face each other face to face at the front and fight it all out. And if these idiots of rulers want to smash each other's skulls, then that is their business alone and not that of the people, who would effectively have to regulate everything in such a way that everything would be ended and regulated in this wise, without a war being able to materialize. Then there would also be no military, which would then wage war for years, murdering, destroying, raping, and bringing hardship, misery, and suffering to the peoples. The taxpayers' money that is pointlessly squandered on every military and its weapons, amounting to countless billions, could also be used for good causes. This, as well as the millions and billions that are squandered abroad for the sake of a good reputation, at the taxpayers' expense, supposedly for development aid, etc., which all the rulers of foreign countries are getting rich off of. All money that would be needed in our own country to allow our own people to live in prosperity instead of abandoning many to poverty and even letting them die mercilessly.
You openly express what we Pleuran also think about this and do not understand that those in power in the state and those who abide by some of the peoples are acting irresponsibly in this way.
Unfortunately, it really is so here among the Earth humans, as I have noted and recognized on various occasions when I have made observations to that effect.
That is indeed the case, and I know what I'm talking about in this regard, because I have the same observations to report.
Then we are traveling in the same boat.
Yes, you could say that. But I will say that I am aware that Svath has taught you many things that are not taught in any school on Earth and will remain secrets to Earth humans for a very long time, but which you should not talk about. He was very versatile and is very well known to us on Era, and also in our entire Federation as a highly esteemed scientist and explorer of Earth, and also of the entire SOL system. And we also know that he also taught you a great deal of knowledge and guided you through the many times that we will unfortunately not be able to fathom. But I still want to ask you what enfant terrible means, because that is unknown to me.
I also feel alienated by that word.
It is foreign to me as well.
Enfant terrible. It is not one word, it is two. What is more, it is not German, it is French, and was in normal usage among us German-speaking Swiss when I was a boy. It means something like terrible child, which I learnt from Svath when we saw the horrors perpetrated by the Nazi henchmen in the concentration camps during the World War. He often called it enfant terrible. But it is also understood as evil black sheep, or degenerate ravenous ace, as well as evil devil and wicked satanic devil, in the sense of a warlock of attitudes.
Your explanation lays it all out clearly.
Now I have something here that I find extremely important and should be mentioned to provide some clarity for once. As a rule, this is misunderstood by human beings as a result of fantasy doctrines, and therefore understood in the way they think according to their beliefs. But the truth is somewhat different from what is assumed and misunderstood. It is a question of when a creation life energy form, which has been wrongly called a spirit form since time immemorial, revives a new personality. When it revives a new personality after the dying, that is to say, death of a human being after the stay in the creation energy level corresponding to it. However, this does not correspond to an incarnation, as is erroneously claimed, because it is fancifully falsely assumed and erroneously and sectarianly claimed that the human being who has died will sooner or later be reborn, thus incarnating, that is to say, reincarnating, re-embodying, and thus becoming human again in such a way that the same human being is born again. However, this does not correspond to the truth, because if the human body has died and is therefore dead, it can never be reanimated again, because if it is really dead, the body cannot be brought back to life. A human body that is only believed to be dead can be reanimated if it is somehow still alive. However, if the body is effectively dead, that is to say deceased, then the life energy of creation erroneously called spirit, that animates it automatically and immediately escapes. However, this energy, which as a whole is of absolutely pure creation origin, does not escape into an afterlife conceived and fantasized by human beings, but into that level of creation energy which is present for it at all times and in which it dwells learning. After the death of the human being's body until it has completely processed all the information during its dwell time in this level and formed it into true knowledge. This is therefore all the information that it has absorbed as creation life energy in the personality during its lifetime. It should now be said that the drawing in and enlivening, and thus the forming of consciousness, takes place over a shorter or longer period of time, depending on the prevailing order, so that it is therefore quite normal for the creation life energy form. There are also quite natural changes, and so-called exceptions, to be drawn into a new personality when it has matured, and it is its turn again. This means that the more human beings there are, and the more of them have died, the longer it takes before a creation life energy form can revitalize a new personality. A revitalization of a new personality fundamentally takes place in human beings on the 21st day after the conception of new life, when the new fruit develops in the womb. Achim Wolff now writes the following about this, after the whole thing has been better explained, because corresponding questions inevitably led to this topic being discussed in more detail and everything being explained in more detail. Letter from A.W. Now I understand everything much better. On the one hand, the dwell time of the creation energy form in the beyond is extended by overpopulation, because the Q is umpteen times longer than with a normal population, as it would be on Earth with approx. 500 million human beings. So, for example, instead of a factor of 1.5, there would be a factor of 27 for an 18-fold overpopulation. On the other hand, human beings learn less than would be possible or correct due to the effects of overpopulation, so that the processing time through the total consciousness block and the creation energy form in the beyond is correspondingly shorter, because there is less material or knowledge to process. As a result, due to the long time spent in the afterlife and the low level of evolutionary progress, personalities are born who cannot keep up with the development that has advanced in the meantime because they are unfinished personalities, so to speak, in the sense that they have fallen behind in their overall development and can therefore only find their way around with difficulty or not at all in the current time from their birth because they have lost touch. If you compare it to a school pupil, it would be a bit like a primary school pupil who does not go into year 5 after the summer break at the end of year 4, but the summer holidays suddenly last 5 years instead of 6 weeks, and then he finds himself in year 10, where he simply cannot keep up because he lacks the knowledge and has missed out on 5 years of development or learning. Could you summarize it like that? Salome and best regards, Achim. Yes, Achim, something like that. Then I have the following here, which Achim wrote regarding the Pope, who said something like,
The head of the Catholic Church joins the long list of non-thinkers who cannot recognize the horrendous overpopulation of the planet as the underlying cause of the climate catastrophe and all environmental destruction as truth. The brain-amputated propagation mania with the overpopulation on planet Earth, which by 2024 will have risen to 18 times the ideal population of 529 million human beings, is also based to a large extent on the well-known criminal sectarian propagation doctrine of the Church, be fruitful and multiply. Due to the religious delusion of the vast majority of Earth humans, they are unfortunately not capable of rational logical thinking, which is proven by their persistent refusal, that is to say, inability to perceive the facts of reality regarding overpopulation and to draw logical conclusions from them, which would lead to an immediate stop of births with subsequent birth regulations.
Achim Wolff, Germany. Achim writes further with the following.
The earth is bogging down. Achim Wolff.
At the 887th contact on Wednesday, the 8th of May 2024, Billy responded to a caller's question about the ever-worsening floods that will lead to the swamping of all countries on Earth. The following article from the FIGU Bulletin number 81 of September 2013 is intended to make readers aware that these predictions from the 1980s are now being fulfilled more and more dramatically. Earth humans should finally listen to the words and admonitions of Billy Edward Albert Meyer and his Plejaren friends and counteract this development by immediately stopping the birth rate with subsequent birth control measures.
Floods of the century are becoming commonplace.
By definition, a flood of the century or flood of the century is the height or discharge of a body of water that is statistically reached or exceeded once every 100 years. In view of the flood disasters on the Elbe and Oder rivers in 1997, 2002, and most recently in June 2013, this term seems outdated, if not ridiculous. Flooding and inundation disasters are likely to recur at ever shorter intervals. According to scientific studies on the future development of precipitation in Europe, the warming of the atmosphere associated with an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations will lead to an increase in atmospheric moisture content. According to the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, a 1 degree K Kelvin increase in temperature would lead to approx. 7% more water vapor in the atmosphere. This in turn is a trigger for more frequent and more intense heavy precipitation events. Accordingly, the frequency and intensity of heavy to extreme precipitation events will increase in all European regions in both summer and winter. This is particularly true for Northern Europe. The trends are significant for both average and extreme precipitation. A trend in precipitation characteristics towards fewer average and more extreme events has numerous consequences. The soil cannot absorb the more intensive precipitation to a sufficient extent, which can lead to a deficit in groundwater replenishment and thus the water supply of large regions on the one hand, and to increased peak discharges in sewage systems and rivers on the other. Supported by large-scale soil sealing in areas of high population density and stream and river straightening for land reclamation, the capacities of the current water drainage systems could soon be exhausted, and a few extreme or several consecutive less intense precipitation events could then lead to more frequent flooding, which, like the flooding in June 2013, could reach or exceed the scale of the disasters on the Oder 1997 and Elbe 2002. A reduction in the amount of snowfall would also not be without consequences for the water supply of the alpine countries. For example, as around 50% of global precipitation is currently stored in reservoirs. This once again fulfills with sad accuracy a prediction made by Billy in the 1950s, and also from later years, as well as those made by the extraterrestrial contact persons Sim Yase and Ptah in 1980 and 2006. Unfortunately, it cannot be assumed that human beings will now become smarter. It is more likely that they will continue to muddle along as before. Consequently, they will continue to push the responsibility for the causes of climate change far away from themselves, or prefer to attribute it to nature in general and to non-existent chance or an imaginary God, etc.
Billy H. 2 NLB wrote in Bulletin Number 78 of September 2012.
Overpopulation will not be officially stopped by the authorities and governments with correspondingly effective measures for a long time yet, because there is still a lack of reason and responsibility, as well as the realization that the already existing and further increasing overpopulation is leading earthly humanity as well as the planet, the climate and the fauna and flora inexorably into a huge catastrophe. This statement is not a simple prophecy, but a combination of prophecy and prediction. Note, the predictions and prophecies, 1951 and 1958, by Billy Edward Albert Meyer, are available free of charge from the FIGU Association. Also available in bundles for distribution to interested parties. In the contact conversations between Billy and the Playerin, there was also often talk of what the future holds in terms of natural disasters and climate change, triggered by the degenerations and destruction of nature by Earth humans as a result of rampant overpopulation.
Excerpt from the 131st Official Contact Conversation on Sunday, the 15th of June, 1980.
So in the vague is the order, Yes. But whatever that order also is, the fact remains today that through the fault of all earthly humanity, much of the mainland will slowly but surely become a waterlogged quagmire and swamp where rampantly spreading disease and death will reign. Floods in southern Lower Saxony in July 2017, 23.11 H.
You mean because of the rain?
Not just because of this rain, no, but because the natural climate has been destroyed through the fault of Earth humans, and the Earth has already been oversaturated with rain for decades. As will also happen in even worse masses in the time to come.
You mean that the Earth will drown in water or rain?
That is approximately how it will come, through the fault of Earth humans themselves.
And nothing can be done about it, I know, because the human beings of this world will not be taught, nor will they want to change.
That is correct.
So they are also partly to blame, so to speak, for the fact that it is raining so much that you would think a new deluge was coming.
That is also correct.
Excerpt from the 434th official contact conversation on Saturday, the 9th of September, 2006.
This will probably still take time, and even if we spread your warning worldwide on the one hand, our scientists are properly narrow-minded, and on the other hand, there is already such economic commercialism behind everything that the thing can hardly be stopped. But there are also many other things that cannot be stopped, such as global warming, environmental destruction, and overpopulation, which are causing tremendous changes in nature. The deforestation of the rainforests and the building on the land, as well as the concreting and tarmacking of large areas, are also contributing to the rapidly advancing climate change, as are the resulting heavy rainfalls, which Simyase already said at the end of the 1970s were slowly drying up Europe.
Unfortunately, that is an irrefutable fact because Earth humans did not listen to the warnings and still do not. Further climate change is not only caused by pollution, but also by the irresponsible alteration of the Earth's surface and the exploitation of its resources. And as you said, also by the deforestation of the rainforests and the concreting over and building up of land areas, especially green spaces. And with regard to the swamping of Europe, it should be said that the problem of unusually heavy rainfall creates new factors of climate change because it drastically changes temperatures. This changes the whole of nature, not only the vegetation, but also the world and the physical characteristics, etc., of creatures and human beings. Extreme snow and hailstorms alternate with equally extreme periods of heat and drought, which also affects and melts the glaciers in the Arctic and Antarctic. Increasingly heavy rainfall is causing more and more debris flows as well as landslides and rockfalls, with the thawing of the permafrost that holds the rock masses together also playing an important role. The warming of the Earth's climate is also causing the waters of the oceans to rise, which will result in cities, villages, and inhabited land areas becoming unstoppably flooded and uninhabitable for Earth humans. As a result, the habitable areas will become smaller and smaller, which means that Earth humans' living space will shrink and become smaller and smaller in relation to the constantly growing overpopulation. As a result, a humanity catastrophe is already predetermined, which in its worst forms can only be stopped by rigorous birth control, that is to say, by a worldwide, controlled, and gradual stop to births in a certain way over a long period of time. However, what has already been destroyed in nature and the climate by Earth humans in terms of overpopulation and its catastrophic consequences can unfortunately no longer be reversed. So natural disasters of all kinds will continue to increase in the coming period and become normal.
Finally, a frank word from the 849th contact of the 12th of June, 2023, on the only effective measures against the destruction of planet Earth.
Then just not. Consequently, therefore, an intermediate question or intermediate matter. What do you think regarding the machinations of the governments, which in terms of all reason are inappropriate and completely insane, and obviously as a result of the demonstrations of the environmentalists, are now going crazy and want to remodel everything regarding means of transport, heating, and electricity, etc.? Accordingly, they are taking crazy and confused decisions and ordering measures that will do more harm than good, especially here in Europe.
Sheer low intelligence, because this will not end the problem of the all-round rampant destruction of the planet, of all ecosystems, of all nature and its fauna and flora, and also of the atmosphere. Only a radical reduction of the horrendous mass of Earth humans, worldwide without ifs and buts and under 1 billion human beings, can bring an end to all destruction and a future. This should be the important strict resolution and implementation order by all leaders of all states, because this measure alone is the only way to ensure the continued existence of humanity in this world. And this is also the only way to avert and put an end to the impending disaster that is looming as a result of artificial intelligence, which is already much further advanced in its development than the peoples of Earth are informed and are in danger of being informed in the future.
Aachen Wolf, Germany.
Since then, however, when it was first mentioned, nothing has been done, even then, and to this day, to counteract the impending damage. Dr. who was a government official in Germany and regularly received Guido's contact reports. First came to me 3 times and then regularly to Guido, where he stayed for 4 or even 5 hours at a time. He often tried to make his voice heard in the German government and to make it clear to the blockheads that a lot had to be done for the future to prevent all the disasters that would occur in the future as a result of violent storms and flooding in Germany, which are now also really occurring in Germany as a result of flooding and swamping. But every time he came here, he complained that he was not being listened to anywhere and that he was talking to a thick wall. A lot of useful things really could have been done, and a lot of damage and suffering, etc., could have been avoided if people had listened to what Mr. was telling those in power. But what was not done in Germany back then is also not being done by other governments around the world, because they are also stubborn to the bone, know everything better, and have a good time at the expense of the people who keep these fritters alive with large salaries. They are all indifferent to what will befall the world in the future. And not just in terms of the storms that will now bring disaster on a global scale, but also in terms of what will happen politically and get completely out of control. This, together with the consequences that will result from the dissatisfaction of populations and the extremely negative changes in the attitudes, behavior, and actions of human beings and technology, and the consequences of artificial intelligence and the destruction of the Earth, its ecosystems, nature and its fauna and flora, the atmosphere and the climate.
Ptah told us about the statesman from Germany because he was interested in him, but he could not help him. And we also know that you were always under attack. Ptah also told us all that and a lot of other things, also that you were shot at, and Silvano was also involved because of that.
That was and is unfortunately the case. But nothing can be done about it, because revenge and retribution for anything and everything that does not suit them is constantly lurking in the underground of human beings' minds. Therefore, if someone thinks differently from what suits these human beings, they immediately take up arms in their wrong mindset, and quickly arise hatred, and seek to judge those who do not suit them according to their own rules through murder and manslaughter. This is what happened again with the crash of the Persian government helicopter, in which President Ebrahim Raisi and Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian of Iran, which I still know as Persia and then as Iran, where I met Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in Tehran when I once went to the Swiss consulate, were killed along with all the other occupants. A total of 9 people were killed, as state television announced on Monday. And as I know, the crash took place near the border with Azerbaijan, whereby the old U.S. helicopter suddenly failed due to manipulation of the controls and crashed, as I know. The manipulation, which of course is kept quiet and everything is denied. But the time has come when politicians, police and other security forces around the world are increasingly being physically attacked and even killed or assassinated by insidious attacks. as happened as a result of the manipulation of the helicopter's controls, which I have just mentioned. As has always been the case, the enemy always comes from within, especially for those who exercise power, are dictatorial, or otherwise assert their might openly, covertly, or secretly. This often happens without the persons concerned even noticing it, because they feel superior to even think about how they are behaving, so they also do not notice what they are actually doing and what wrong behavior they are displaying. They like to hear themselves talk and do not realize that their talk is morbid and nothing more than drivel, believing that everything they babble on about is right and important, so they do not see that they are causing boredom, inattention, resentment, and hostility in the listeners or those being talked to. In their subterranean or secretly conscious behavior of power, they do not notice that all their behavior is fundamentally wrong. And this behavior and conduct can be found among politicians and also in private communities, clubs, and religious associations around the world. Any leadership or misleadership always creates discord and secret enmity underground within its own ranks, which suddenly strikes outwards and causes disaster. This often even leads to war or a bloody revolution, whereby the whole skirmish ultimately lasts for years, perhaps resulting in a ceasefire, that is to say a truce, after which, after years, one party may be victorious over the other. Then, in short, it is simply called peace, but this could not be more deceptive, because a peace after a war or a revolution is never a true peace. What is called after a war, a revolution, etc., is truthfully only submission and enmity, and thus exactly the opposite of what is claimed by politicians, for example.
But you are not supposed to say that regarding the background of the crashed helicopter. But what you go on to say in frank terms is not just a speech, but a grasping and effectively true explanation of why the clandestine aggressions develop from within against virtually any leader who consciously or secretly, subliminally or simply lowly intelligent and not clear to himself about his own behavior, exercises might.
I am only telling you about the criminal machinations. Apart from that, I have my points. But good. What was talked about earlier? I still have to say that when nasty attacks are directed at me, I simply accept everything, as I have done since my adolescence. But unfortunately, this has led to the fact that, in addition to the sect members of the sect, in Bulak and even by the authorities and the police far and wide, in addition to various institutions, I have been made a pig of and maliciously accused with untruths. There were even several attempts to get rid of me, even when I was traveling abroad, as well as in Hinwil and several times around the center, as Silvano's life was also endangered several times and Engelbert once. Silvano was even shot at once when we were driving to Saland and the bullet ricocheted off the windscreen. Unfortunately, we could not catch the shooter, even though we chased after him because the guy with the gun was faster than us because we had to park the car first and could only run after the man afterwards, but he was already too far away. Silvano insisted on going to the police, which we also did, but they just laughed and claimed that we had only been hit on the windscreen by a stone from a passing lorry. This was despite the fact that there was no car behind us or in front of us, and we were alone on the road, and we also saw and followed the gunman with his rifle. Consequently, no effort was even made to make a report. Now, I cannot hammer sense into human beings who do not teach themselves what is good and correct. But I have and find no reason to vilify or hate them. For me, human beings are simply human beings, and if they deem it necessary to insult, harass, or disrespect me, then that is their own doing, which I cannot change. The human being has to come to terms with himself and know what is right and wrong, so he also has to act accordingly. And when it comes to advising him, I am happy to do so if I am in a position to do so, but I cannot tell human beings what to do. I do not care what a person thinks and believes, which imaginary god he worships and adores, which saints he idolizes and pays homage to in any other way. Because for me they are simply human beings and remain so, also when they do wrong. So I can accept what is right with them and reject what is wrong, and seen correctly. No human being is flawless in their thoughts, actions, and behavior, so neither am I. Consequently, it is not my place to condemn human beings, even if I recognize evil and wrong in some of them, and speak the truth out loud about it. Even when I call them idiots, I only denounce their recklessness, their wrong thinking, behavior and actions. But it is always far from me to attack them as human beings, to disregard them, or to harm them in any way because of their belief in a god or saints, etc., or because of their worldly faith. As for Occam's point about artificial intelligence, the catastrophe that will result from it is probably unavoidable, because evil has already resulted from it. It is not enough that artificial dogs have already been fitted with firearms on their heads, but it is also already happening that human beings' voices are being falsified to such an extent that it is no longer possible to distinguish whether they are artificially created or actually spoken by the human beings to whom they effectively belong. Singing voices of singers are also already being falsified in this wise, just as recordings of evidence voices are also being produced as false evidence, as well as,
But this you shall not explain, but that you think and behave as you have said, we know that also that you could not do your work if you thought and acted differently.
We all know that, but now Enjana and I have to go, because our duty calls us. However, as we still have a few things to discuss in connection with what we talked about at the beginning, we will not be able to do so now because the time is running out. We will all come back tomorrow and discuss everything again in detail, because I have now considered a few things that are a little unclear to me and which we should probably discuss in more detail. What do you think of my request?
Of course, if you think it is necessary, then so be it.
That is unquestionable, and so we can go, Florena. Goodbye, dear friend.
See you tomorrow then, dear father friend.
goodbye together. See you tomorrow then. But wait. What I want to say now is that the International Court of Justice is endeavoring to obtain an arrest warrant for the mass murderer Netanyahu, along with some of the leaders of Hamas. This does not suit various rulers who irresponsibly defend these mass murderers, such as the senile President Biden of the USA, along with others who irresponsibly watch as the Israeli army murders, rapes, and destroys in Palestine under the dictates of the mass murderer. How Switzerland will react to this is likely to be controversial, because many of those who are in favor of Netanyahu, as is also the case with Zelensky, who is to be helped by pumping money into Ukraine and withdrawing the refugee status of refugees from Ukraine, from Switzerland, so that they can go back to Ukraine and take part in the war there as cannon fodder. Once again, the question arises, where does this leave Switzerland's neutrality? On the other hand, the question also arises as to what extent all the arms-supplying idiots who react to Zelensky's begging in this regard, plus those parts of the population who are in favor of it, are even aware that they are at least complicit in indirect murder. Namely, every ruler who allows weapons to be supplied, as well as every citizen who is in favor of supplying weapons. They are all guilty of aiding and abetting mass murder. But look here, to all that is written here in this email, I have already prescribed everything in response, because what I have received here was a long time ago, and is more than familiar to me. Ava and I only spoke about Vera Brun a few weeks ago, when something was written about it in a journal. But in this email there is something about Rosemary Nitrobit. But what Mrs. wrote about it was that I knew something because she had heard from... that I might know more about it because I had once indicated to that the two murderers would not be investigated because it was a hot potato to expose them. But the whole thing was quite a long time ago, and it is too tedious for me to read aloud. But if you have read this first part, then I want to comment on it. So see and read for yourself what is said here, which was probably taken from a newspaper or something.
Dear Mr. Billy, excuse me, but
Rosemary Nitrobit Maria Rosalia August Rosemary Nitrobit.
1st in February 1933 in Dusseldorf. Presumably 29th October 1957 in Frankfurt am Main was a German prostitute who was murdered. During the police investigation, it emerged that she had been in contact with important personalities. As the murder could not be solved, it was suspected that influential business and political circles were trying to prevent the case from being solved. Known during her lifetime as a high-class Frankfurt prostitute, Nitribit achieved nationwide fame after her death. Her life inspired a novel, several feature films, the musical Das Mädchen Rosemarie, and theatre plays. Non-fiction books and film documentaries deal with the Nitribit case.
Life.
Rosemary Nitribit was already well known during her lifetime, especially in Frankfurt am Main. Numerous media reports about her appeared after her death. Nevertheless, there is little certainty about her life. Rosemary, as she later called herself, was born out of wedlock. Rosemary probably never met her father, a labourer from Düsseldorf who later refused to pay child support. Like her two half-sisters, she grew up in poor circumstances with her mother in Ratingen and Düsseldorf. Her mother had to serve several prison sentences. Rosemary was sent to a children's home several times, where she was considered difficult to raise and ran away several times. Finally, she was sent to a foster family in Niedermendig. There, at the age of 11, she was raped by an 18-year-old man from the neighbourhood, who was drafted into the Wehrmacht shortly afterwards. The crime was never reported to the authorities, and the perpetrator was never brought to justice, although the village knew who it was. She earned her first money as an adolescent through prostitution. She later moved to Koblenz, then to Frankfurt am Main, where, still a minor, she worked as a waitress and mannequin, but soon returned to prostitution. She was picked up and sent to a reformatory again, from which she soon escaped. From April 1952 to April 1953, Rosemarie Nitribit was housed in the Rheinische Landesarbeitsanstalt Brauweiler, in Brauweiler Abbey near Pulheim. As she was considered a serious case, she was declared of age prematurely, before the age of 21, so that she could be released. She went to great lengths to conceal her humble origins. In order not to stand out in society for her lack of education and cosmopolitanism, she learned English and French and took courses in good manners. In 1954, a suitor gave her an Opel Kapitän, an unusual gift for a woman in her early 20s at the time. Other suitors invited her on holiday to the Mediterranean. According to personal notes she left behind and research by the Frankfurt Criminal Investigation Department, Nitribit earned an untaxed income of around 90,000 DM in the last year of her life, around 260,000 euros in today's purchasing power. In mid-1956, she acquired the famous black Mercedes-Benz 190 SL with red leather seats, with which she caused quite a stir in Frankfurt and which became her trademark. The whereabouts of the Mercedes is unclear.
Murder and burial.
On 1st November 1957, Nitribit was found dead in her flat in Frankfurt am Main at Stiftstrasse 36 near Eschenheimer Turm with a laceration to her head and strangulation marks on her neck. According to the autopsy, her death had occurred 20 to 30 hours earlier. Nitribit was buried in the North Cemetery in Düsseldorf location, Field 95 Nombers. 11:48. Her head had previously been cut off and withheld by the Frankfurt Public Prosecutor's Office as possible evidence. It was later given to the Frankfurt police as a teaching aid for police officer training and exhibited in the Frankfurt Crime Museum. After 50 years, in December 2007, the Public Prosecutor's Office released Nitribit's skull. It was buried in her grave in the North Cemetery on 10th of February 2008. Donors financed an extension of its useful life.
Investigations and rumors.
The officials investigated a number of suspects, some of them prominent, including members of the Krupp family Harold von Bohlen and Halbach, Harold Quandt, Ernst Wilhelm Sachs, and his younger brother Gunther Sachs. On the other hand, Rumours repeatedly circulated in film and television about Nitrobit's high-ranking customers from the Bonn political scene, according to which the then Federal Minister of Transport Hans Christoph Seebohm and later Federal Chancellor Kurt Georg Kiesinger were also on the prostitute's list of visitors, cannot be substantiated on the basis of the relevant witness statements and interrogation transcripts. Alfred Kalk, the detective superintendent in charge of the case, said of the notebook in which Nitrobit recorded her contacts, "There were names in the book, but they were not from the big world of the powerful and rich. They were just ordinary citizens." The highest was a bank director from Bad Homburg. Nitrobit had written down a total of 60 names in her pocket diary from 1957. The owner of a grocery shop in Munich was shadowed and interrogated several times in December 1958 because Nitrobit had written down his name in the pocket diary together with the keywords Düsseldorf and Munich. In January 1959, the suspect was informed that the investigation against him had been dropped. 12 hours later, he suffered a fatal heart attack. Hardly explicable investigative mishaps by the Frankfurt CID fueled suspicions of a planned cover-up. Some files disappeared without trace. The officers made numerous mistakes for years and decades. There was speculation that explosive files and interrogation transcripts had been deliberately sidelined in order to protect prominent clients and suspects from politics and business. In 2013, however, archivists from the Frankfurt police discovered the documents in their archives that were believed to have been lost. The evidence book and some selected documents had been actively maintained by the Frankfurt investigators until 1972 and then simply forgotten in the archives after the case was closed. With the discovery of the files, many of the conspiracy theories surrounding the case can now be considered disproved. Parts of the 24-volume investigation files, long thought lost, are stored in the Frankfurt police archives. These include 4 volumes of interrogations, Rosemarie Nitrobit's notebook, identification photos of suspects, 19 love letters, postcards and poems by Harold von Bohlen und Halbach. The multiple claims that a running tape recorder had been found in Nitrobit's flat, which had recorded the arrival of the last visitor, can now be considered refuted. Although a Grundig tape recorder was found in the flat, it had last been used to record vinyl records. The recording of the voice recordings would not have been possible without further ado for technical reasons alone. At the end of the inserted tape, there was in fact a voice sequence that had obviously been recorded at an earlier time against the direction of the other music recordings on the tape. The poor quality of the voice recording can be explained by the way the tape ran when it was first played by the Frankfurt police. If you play the voice sequence against the direction of the music recordings, you can hear Nitrobit calling her dog to her.
Court proceedings.
The main suspect was a friend of Nitrobit's, the then 34-year-old sales representative Heinz Christian Pohlmann, plus 1990 in Munich. He was charged but acquitted in July 1960 for lack of evidence. Despite considerable doubts about the origin of the large amount of money that was in his possession immediately after the crime and had probably been stolen from Nitrobit's flat, it was not possible to recognize with absolute certainty that Pohlmann was the perpetrator in the murder case, according to the Frankfurt jury court's grounds for the verdict. Pohlmann's defense lawyer, Alfred Seidel, who later became the Bavarian Minister of the Interior, had questioned the time of death, which the police had assumed to be the afternoon of 29 October 1957, and was proved right. Among other things, the officers arriving at the scene had failed to measure the temperature of the body or the ambient temperature in Nitrobit's flat, which, according to the police report, was very warm and had floor heating, which would have been absolutely necessary to determine the exact time of death. There was also witness testimony that Nitrobit had been running errands at the nearby Mathieu Butcher's shop and had been seen on Grosse Eschenheimer Straße after the time of death assumed by the investigators. According to the jury, the accused had an alibi for this period. The public prosecutor's office waived an appeal. The documents of the trial are now in the Hessian Main State Archives in Wiesbaden.
What do you say to that? What is there to say about it?
I have talked about this before. It was probably still with Simyase, but I do not remember exactly, namely that I was in Germany with my friend Marga for a few weeks in the 1960s with Pastor Opel on the Bergstrasse, where I made myself somewhat useful as a young man as a pastor. I got to know human beings who took me to Rosemary Nitrobit's house, where she used to live. Ask then, in response to my questions, found out what was going on with Rosemary Nitrobit, who was a high-class prostitute and had been murdered, and Ask It then found out who killed her. She gave the name, which I am not allowed to mention, because the descendants of this man and their descendants are still alive today, just as their descendants will also live long into the future, which would certainly cause me great legal difficulties. So I will also not go into the next point, the
Vera Brun murder case. Otto Braun.
Otto Braun, 28 or April 1894 in Würzburg, according to other sources in Munich, plus between 14 and 19th. April 1960 in Pfäffikon, was a German gynecologist and traded in real estate. He gained notoriety for his murder, for which Vera Bruna and Johann Feuerbach were sentenced to life imprisonment in a circumstantial trial. Braun's involvement in arms dealing and espionage, however, was never the subject of the trial.
Life.
Otto Braun came from a family whose members had been part of the leadership of the West German Secret Services since the Second World War. His cousin Albert Braun was a general in the intelligence unit during the Nazi era. In 1956, he took over the management of telecommunications reconnaissance in Pullach under the code name Schwarz. His nephew Dietrich Braun became head of the Security Counterintelligence Division and later became BND resident in Tunisia under the code name Pranner. Braun became an employee of the Abwehr in 1928. He was a medical officer of the Alliance and a member of the NSDAP with the membership number 1725-299. Between 1937 and 1944, Braun protected human beings from the Nazi dictatorship by issuing them with certificates. One couple was thus saved from forced labor. The Gestapo investigated Braun for violating the Ordinance on Extraordinary Broadcasting Measures. In 1944, a local group leader initiated party disciplinary proceedings for repeatedly not wearing the party badge. In 2001, journalists found in a BND memo that Braun had served the espionage of Hitler's Wehrmacht as an officer, or V-Mann, and later also the BND, and had been involved in arms trafficking. In 1954, a former member of the Abwehr, Sonja Blechacker, was found dead in Starnberg. She was a friend of Braun and had married a Colonel Blechacker who had died in 1944. After the war, Sonja Blechacker had once been invited by Braun to his house in Pfäffikon. Braun had been questioned about the Blechacker case. The Criminal Investigation Department in Fürstenfeldbruck was responsible for homicides in the Starnberg district. The Blechacker case was a suicide investigation. Braun hired Vera Bruna as a chauffeur in Munich in July 1957, for which he provided her with a second-hand VW Beetle and paid her 200 German marks a month. In October 1957, Bruna chauffeured Braun to his Finca Casavana on the Costa Brava for the first time, which was looked after by the manageress Katja Hinze. In 1958, Braun dismissed Hinze and entrusted Bruna with the management of the property near Lloret de Mar in the Spanish province of Girona. On 23 May 1959, Braun drew up a will in Arbaces in which he granted Bruna a lifelong right of residence on the 8.3-hectare estate.
Death.
When Praun did not appear at his practice in Lindwurmstrasse in Munich on 19 April 1960, the Tuesday after Easter, his receptionist drove to Pfäffikon with her flatmate at around 10 acres. Her companion entered the villa via the patio door and found Praun shot dead. The police later also found the housekeeper, Elfriede Klue, who had been shot in the neck in the basement of the villa. That same night, the head of the Criminal Investigation Department, Mr. Rodatis, determined that Praun had committed an extended suicide, which was positive for the investigation statistics. Praun was buried in Munich's North Cemetery on 22 April 1960. He left behind a fortune estimated at 1.6 million German marks, or around 4.4 million euros in today's money. The will was opened on 2 August 1960 at the Starnberg District Court. In his will dated 23 May 1959, Praun granted Bruna a lifelong right to use his property in Lloret de Mar. Praun bequeathed his property in Spain to Bruna on the condition that a note in favor of his son, Günther Praun, 1930, would be entered in the land register when he inherited the property. Bruna would have been able to use the property, but any sale would have been subject to Günther Praun's consent. After the will was opened, the consensus on Praun's cause of death was no longer undivided. 2 weeks after the will was opened, Günther Praun's lawyer filed criminal charges against unknown persons with the public prosecutor's office at Munich II Regional Court for 2 counts of murder. He also requested the exhumation and dissection of Otto Praun's body. On the 27th October 1960, the investigating judge at Munich District Court granted the request. The subsequent autopsy revealed that Praun had been murdered with 2 shots to the head. In the spring of 1962, Bruna and his co-defendant Johann Feuerbach were put on trial. Günther Praun introduced a number of crucial pieces of evidence into the proceedings that had not been secured by the police and could have been falsified by Praun. The contradictory statements of Bruna's daughter, Sylvia Cossi, who had originally incriminated her mother and then recanted her statement in court, also played an important role in the trial. On 4 June 1962, Bruna and Feuerbach were sentenced to life imprisonment for joint double murder. An appeal for revision was rejected by the Federal Supreme Court on 4 December 1962, making the sentence final. Bruna was pardoned in 1979 and released from prison. She died in 2001.
Vera Brune, individual references.
Vera Maria Brune, née Kohlen, 6 February 1910 in Cray, Psagsar, 17 April 2001 in Munich, was a woman sentenced to life imprisonment and deprivation of civil rights for life by the Munich II Regional Court on 4 June 1962, together with Johann Feuerbach for the murder of the Munich doctor Otto Praun and his housekeeper Elfriede Klue. Even after Bruna's death, the alleged wrongful conviction was the subject of public debate about the right of retrial in Germany and the true background to the offense, and gave rise to controversy in the West German tabloid press about the lifestyle of single mothers.
Life.
Vera Bruna grew up in middle-class circumstances in Essen-Cray. Her father, Ludwig Kohlen, 1870 to 1951, was the mayor of Cray-Leitha, an independent mayor's office until 1929, when she was born. Bruna's first marriage was to the actor Hans Cossi, the father of her daughter Sylvia, 1941 to 1990. She later married the well-known film composer Lothar Bruna. This marriage also ended in divorce.
Praun murder case police investigation.
Otto Praun and his housekeeper Elfriede Klue were found shot dead in Praun's villa in Pfäffikon on Lake Starnberg on 19th April 1960, the Tuesday after Easter. The time of death was determined to be Maundy Thursday, 14th April 1960. Initially, the investigators assumed that Prawn had committed an extended suicide. It was only after Vera Bruna's will established that she was the heir to Prawn's finca in Spain that the bodies were exhumed and autopsied at the instigation of Prawn's son Günther. Vera Bruna and her acquaintance Johann Fehrbach were arrested in October 1961. Both were charged with murder. Günther Prawn, the son of the murdered Otto Prawn, introduced various pieces of evidence into the proceedings. In particular, the victim's wristwatch and a letter allegedly found at the crime scene, which had not been secured by the police and may have been falsified. The contradictory statements of Vera Bruna's daughter, Sylvia Cassi, who had originally incriminated her mother and then recanted her statement in court, also played an important role.
Trial and sentence to life imprisonment.
Even before the trial at Munich Regional Court the Secu began, Bruna was portrayed as the guilty party in Stern, the Münchner Abendzeitung and other media. The circumstantial evidence trial was reported in the tabloid press for weeks, portraying the attractive Bruna as a money-grabbing slut and speculating about, at the time, scandalous erotic debauchery. Vera Bruna had become massively embroiled in contradictions and also tried to bribe witnesses. On 4 June 1962, the court sentenced her and co-defendant Johann Fehrbach to life imprisonment for joint double murder.
The rejected motions for appeal.
Bruna's and Fehrbach's defense lawyers filed a total of 5 motions for retrial in favor of the defendants and were unsuccessful. The Karlsruhe appeal was rejected by the Federal Court of Justice on 4 December 1962, which meant that the verdict became legally binding. A petition for clemency submitted by the Action Group of German lawyers in 1972 was rejected by the then Minister-President Alfons Goppel in 1975. After 18 years in prison, Vera Bruna was unexpectedly pardoned on 17 December 1979 by the then Bavarian Prime Minister Franz Josef Strauss CSU and released from Aichach prison. After Bruna's death, her adopted son David Wilfried Tasch gave the Hamburg lawyer Gerhard Strate the mandate to reopen the trial.
Criticism.
Bruna denied the offense she was accused of throughout her life. In 2001, the weekly newspaper Die Zeit came to the conclusion that is now the legal consensus. Vera Bruna, whether a murderer or not, should never have been convicted on the basis of such one-sided and shoddy investigations. It was therefore all the more surprising to many that no retrial was allowed. Anwalt's magazine wrote in its number 17/2000, "According to the latest findings of forensic medicine, it is clear that the death of the victims could not have occurred at the time that the court assumed. This time of the crime was an important part of the grounds for the judgment. According to research by WDR, from today's perspective, there are further inconsistencies in the judgment. Several unsolved deaths have been proven, including actual or possible murders among witnesses and accomplices. Applications for a retrial have been rejected for years. There is evidence that Prawn had links to the illegal arms trade. In particular, he was linked to a major corruption affair, the scandal surrounding the procurement of the HS-30 infantry fighting vehicle. One of the main persons involved in this affair was Werner Repenning, Strauss's personal advisor. It was often assumed that Prawn's murder was linked to these connections.
Life after release from prison.
After her release from prison in 1979, Bruna lived under the name Maria Adam in her condominium at Kaulbachstrasse 40 in Munich. She died there in 2001 in the Klinikum Rechts der Isar and was buried in the Solnforest Cemetery in the grave of her first husband. Günther Prawn, the son of the murdered Otto Prawn, lived in the villa in Pfäffikon on Lake Starnberg until his death in 2008. The house in Spain, which according to the murdered man's will should have gone to Vera Bruna, also passed to him because she had been declared unworthy of inheritance after the final conviction.
Johann Feuerbach.
Johann Feuerbach, 9 August 1913 in Cologne, plus to 21 June 1970 in Straubing, is a man sentenced to life imprisonment and deprivation of civil rights for life by the Munich II Regional Court on 4 June 1962, together with Vera Bruna, for the murder of the Munich doctor Otto Braun and his lover Elfriede Klo.
Life.
Feuerbach grew up in Cologne and learned the trade of gunsmith in Hermann Kolb's machine tool factory. He was drafted into the Wehrmacht on 1 January 1939. He deserted from the Eastern Front in 1943 and subsequently worked as a construction worker in Cologne under the name Hans Spiess. Feuerbach managed the construction of a makeshift shelter for the family of the actor Hans Kossi on a plot of land rented by Kossi. In autumn 1944, the rented house was destroyed by bombs and the makeshift shelter was buried. Feuerbach succeeded in having an entrance to the makeshift shelter cleared, which saved Kossi's wife Vera, who became known by her second married name Vera Bruna in 1961-62, and their daughter Sylvia 1941 to 1990, among others. After the end of the war, the Kossi family moved to Munich, while Feuerbach found work as an assembly fitter in Cologne. In 1960, Feuerbach was employed with compulsory insurance and was widowed. On 13 April 1960, a Wednesday, he was on sick leave, which was checked by the responsible health insurance company. Otto Braun had bought a VW Beetle for his chauffeur Vera Bruna, which had been organized by Feuerbach. On 3 October 1961, Vera Bruna was remanded in custody on the basis of an arrest warrant dated 26 September 1961. On 12 October 1961, Feuerbach was arrested in Cologne and remanded in custody in Klingelputz and later in the Munich Neudeck prison. On 28 November 1961, the police informer and later prosecution witness Siegfried Schramm was also taken to Neudeck. In an interim report, the court had stated that Feuerbach was not ruled out as a possible perpetrator, but rather was casually associated with the crime and had made himself suspicious through various contradictory statements. On 25 April 1962, a trial by jury began at the Munich II Regional Court against Bruna and Feuerbach. They were accused of murdering the doctor Otto Braun and his housekeeper Elfriede Klo on 14 April 1960 in Braun's villa in Pfäffikon. On 4 June 1962, after 22 days of trial and 113 witness statements, the verdict was announced by 6 jurors and 3 professional judges: life imprisonment for joint double murder. Johann Feuerbach died of heart failure in Straubing prison on 21 June 1970. In 1978, 8 years after Feuerbach's death, Der Spiegel reported that Johann Feuerbach, like Walter Huppenkotten, would not have been convicted if his legal advisor Alfred Seidel had not handed over the mandate to his law firm colleague Heinz Pelka and trainee lawyer Martin Amelung. He allegedly did so mainly for financial reasons.
Reopening of the proceedings.
The appeal against the alleged miscarriage of justice was rejected by the Federal Court of Justice on 4 December 1962, making the verdict legally binding. 2 motions for retrial were filed in favor of Vera Bruna and 3 in favor of Johann Feuerbach.
There is no evidence to support the jury's account of the double murder. The court's reconstruction of the offense is pure invention. There's no evidence against an invention. Legally, I can do nothing about it. I would like to emphasize that it can happen to any citizen of this state to find themselves in the same situation as Mrs.
Wilhelm Haddenhorst. Before October 1960, Revue and Neue Illustrierte reported on the witnesses to an application for reinstatement by Heinz Pelka. One Josef Matzerath explained in the magazine why he had not come forward as a witness in the murder trial. In mid-1962, he had applied for probation because of a prison sentence. It had not yet been granted. I was afraid that it would be refused if I spoiled the tour for the public prosecutor in Munich. In 1962, Matzerath reported that he had met Feuerbach in the Cologne nightclub Sevilla on the night from Maundy Thursday to Good Friday 1960 and had talked to him about women. A statement that he did not want to repeat under oath. The application for a retrial was rejected by Judge Conrad Sattler in 1964. Sattler gave seminars on constitutional law at the Federal Intelligence Service in Pullach for weeks in the 1950s. A new witness, Hans Joachim Seidenschnur, said that Otto Braun had traveled to Algeria and had been mistaken for an arms dealer. Witness Roger Henkes stated in autumn 1967 that Otto Braun had called him in Frankfurt on Maundy Thursday, 14th April 1960, and demanded money, to which Werner Repenning and a Lieutenant Colonel Schroeder had immediately responded. The corresponding application for retrial was made by Dr. Maximilian Girth, formerly a government and criminal counselor. The murder weapon in the Elfriede Klue Otto Braun double murder was an FN Baby Browning pistol. On 20th April 1960, one day after the discovery of the two bodies, the investigating chief detective Karl Rodatis shot the half-starved spaniel found with Braun's murder weapon, thus destroying any possible traces of the weapon. Braun had two pistols of this model. Renat Meyer, 15th of July, 1918, Königsberg, plus February 1969. Munich was Otto Braun's receptionist until his death. According to Ortner, that a pistol that was no longer found in Dr. Braun's practice was an FN model baby, an account that made Ms. Reinhard Gehlen, president of the BND, allegedly had Franz Josef Strauss investigated for possible involvement in Braun's alleged arms deals. The motions for retrial were based on this.
So I must also remain silent on this case, because here too, at the present time, there are still human beings from the line of who could or would fall into disrepute if the truth were to come to light. Consequently, nothing must also be said about what Ascot found out when she, out of her own interest at the time, investigated what really happened, which she then also told me. Otto Braun and his housekeeper were already murdered on the 14th of April 1960 at 8.17 HRS. Not just on the 19th of April 1960, by who had served and murdered as an SS man in Hitler's World War, who was then commissioned by to commit the murder for a sum of DM 100,000. Never received this money. However, because never had it at his disposal, or at least claimed to have, and put off, who then killed himself around 3.5 years after the double murder as a result of his unbearable cancer. And as for the fact that he had a dispute with his son Günther Braun, Braun fell out with him, so there was not a good relationship between them. So I cannot comment on that because I do not actually know anything about it. Consequently, I am also not aware of why there was such a G-Vault clash between father and son that the two somehow became estranged. Nor do I know why the time of death was falsified by the coroner's office. And indeed it was, as Ascot was able to find out, because Braun was shot on the 14th of April at 08.17 H. After which the housekeeper was murdered 3 minutes later. Vera Bruna and Johann Feuerbach were, as Ascot found out, far away at the time of the double murder. At the time of the double murder, they were far away from the scene of the crime, and could therefore never have committed the crime, which was also truthfully committed by on behalf of, who then executed himself years later as a result of his inability to bear his incurable illness. I can say no more about this but now I still have some questions here that are intended for the passive GV, and have been answered, which I am happy to submit to you. Bernadette has answered them to the best of her ability and understanding, so I will reproduce them here, as I am sure there are readers who are interested in them.
Questions on spiritual doctrine, which were asked at the passive members meeting 2024.
Question: What is the difference between the life of death and life as a pure form of creation energy after the physical body is no longer needed? Both no longer have material consciousness, so they both seem to have a lot in common.
Answer: the creation energy form instantly returns to its own creation energy form level after the death of the material body, where everything learnt by human beings during their life is processed and stored in pure knowledge, which takes a certain amount of time and which is called death life for the understanding of human beings. However, the term death life is only to be considered purely illustrative as an aid for the human being so that he can visualize what happens to him or his creation energy form after his death, which does not have several different creation energy lives, but is always and in every case a unity at every stage of its existence and always remains the same, but continues to evolve.
Question: does sensation exist in death life or another kind of perception? And what is the meaning of death life after discarding the physical body as a creation energy form that lives, exists in a completely creational energetic wise? Does this mean that the creation energy form creates its own worlds to live, exist in?
Answer: in the death life or creation energy form level, there are no sensations or perceptions of the kind that human beings have and might have in an acute material life. The creation energy form is completely devoid of personality and only of a purely energetic nature, which is why it cannot be associated in any wise with human experiences and ideas, which is also the reason why human beings cannot form any real idea of the creation energy form and how it works. It can best be compared to electric current, which is always present and can be used, for example, to light a lamp by flicking a switch. The electrical energy is also present when the lamp switch is in the off position and the energy is not being used. To illustrate, you could compare it so that the burning light corresponds to the life of a human being, which ends when the switch is turned off. The creation energy is then, however, like the electric current, still present, but withdrawn into its creation energy form life energy level, and is simply used again the next time the light is switched on, that is to say, a new human being is revitalized by the creation energy form. The purpose of the processes in the so-called death life is that the knowledge that the human being has acquired in material life is processed and stored energetically in a strictly logical form in the knowledge store of the creation energy form, where it is then available to every further human life form that is revitalized by the creation energy form in the future. This is an important evolutionary process, which is necessary because the creation energy form can only learn and acquire knowledge from human beings during a certain phase of its development during an acute material life. This is the case until it is strong and mature enough to continue its further evolution independently, without the revitalization of a human being and without the use of a material consciousness complex on a purely energetic basis.
Question: in the book The Way of Life, number 234, I am confused by the term Western Northern form of laziness and Southern Eastern form of laziness. Please explain.
Answer: this is section 234, which we are quoting only in the form of an excerpt because of its length. Many human beings are carried away by an indifferent inaction, which in truth is nothing other than a phlegmatic, dull, and unenergetic laziness, which is to be categorized into a Western Northern and a Southern Eastern form. Southern Eastern laziness is largely expressed in sitting around in the sun or in the shade all day long, doing nothing and letting every hard-working person be a good human being and avoiding any work or other significant or meaningful activity as much as possible, drinking tea and doing trivial things with friends, relatives, or acquaintances for entertainment, while the hard-working do their tedious work and use their free time wisely to learn and make progress. In contrast, Western Northern laziness is of a completely different nature, although it nevertheless has in common with Southern Eastern laziness that all the important things in life are disregarded and neglected, causing them to wither away criminally. The Western Northern laziness of human beings is characterized by the fact that the important things in life and evolution are displaced by compulsive activities, such as meaningless amusements, etc., with which leisure time and life are crammed, leaving no time at all to attend to the really important things in life. The answer to what is meant by the Western Northern form or Southern Eastern form of laziness is actually already sufficiently and understandably explained in section 234. It is about the wise way in which the laziness and lack of interest of human beings in dealing with creation energy teaching, that is to say, with their own evolution, is expressed, or how the distraction from this existentially important topic is handled by the majority of human beings in these different regions of the world. The Western Northern form of laziness, that is to say, distraction, for example, concentrates mainly on superficial entertainment and meaningless amusements, while the Southern Eastern form is predominantly orientated towards not being active and cultivating the proverbial laziness by maintaining excessive contact with friends and extended family, with whom one chats about trivialities. Both forms of distraction are unconscious and uncontrolled, but with the clear aim of avoiding the confrontation with oneself and with the teaching of creation energy, that is to say, with one's own evolution, because the effort and labor that should be spent on cultivating and building one's own personality seems too costly and brings too little material benefit.
Question: what role if not dissolved? Does the total consciousness play when the human spirit form reaches the pure spiritual level?
Answer: the human being's total consciousness plays absolutely no role in the creation energetic level. The total consciousness is, so to speak, the instrument of the creation life energy form, which allows the human being to acquire knowledge, ability, and wisdom during a material life, which is then reworked by the creation energy form into energetic knowledge after the human being's death. When his total consciousness is dissolved and stored in its knowledge store, the total consciousness block. The total consciousness block is therefore the storehouse of creation life energy through which the basic personality of a new consciousness complex is developed and formed when the creation energy form enlivens a new human being, who then expands and develops this basic personality in the course of his material life if he endeavors to evolve through conscious and independent thinking and does not succumb to the temptation of religious or worldly beliefs, thereby paralyzing his entire development. As soon as the creation energy form is strong enough or developed far enough, it no longer needs a material life form for its further evolution, through which it can acquire further knowledge, which is why the consciousness complex or the total consciousness block is then no longer necessary. After this first phase, in which it is dependent on a materially existing human being who endeavors to develop it further, the creation energy form continues to develop in more subtle levels, where it continues its evolution.
That is actually everything discussed today from my side.
For my part, however, I want to come back to the fact that I really no longer want to observe the events in the war zones in detail in the way that it has gone together with you as a result of your request. All the time of such evil and really malicious observations in the Middle East and also in Ukraine have affected me so much and caused lasting emotions in me, which have been causing neurotic disorders in me for several months now, as is also the case with Florena and Enjana, which is why we want to refrain from such observation trips in future.
You should have told me about that. Then I would not have asked you to take me there. I also have to ask Quetzal how he is also experiencing similar movements.
He told us nothing of the sort, just as we also mentioned nothing to him of our problem in this regard.
It is really irresponsibly stupid of me to have led you into these endeavors without asking. I should have asked you if you were immune to the barbaric things that happen here on Earth.
Our task is not such that we have to observe individual events, but only such that we have to make records of the events that show what is happening with regard to the course of the actual acts of war, and thus also with regard to the destruction.
I had no idea about that, nor that you were immune to the brutality of the Earthlings, and therefore also to the war crimes of this form. I should have known that because you have been at peace for over 52,000 years, so you have never known war. And when I think about it, I really was behaving more than just like a fool.
You should not think and say it like that, because that is effectively not correct. We should have explained to you that such events are completely foreign and incomprehensible to us, whereas they have often been present to you since your early adolescence, and you have therefore learnt to behave neutrally towards them. To process this in this way and to...
Precisely. Through Svath's help, I was also able to work out, as you say, a neutrality regarding such happenings, and even worse ones. But still, it always hits me deeply. I am also always completely out of mind, because I cannot understand what is going on, and cannot comprehend the evil actions of human beings. I am really too stupid, and I was already too stupid as a boy. Although even Svath could not help me in this respect, because he always said that he felt the same way, and that he could not cope within himself with the evil coming at him from outside.
I can understand that because such human degenerations as I observed together with you are for me as well as for Florena and Enjana.
Not only incomprehensible, but so deviant as to be beyond your comprehension. I should have known that, silly me.
Please.
It is true, I really am a fool. How could I have been so stupid? I am sick to my stomach now. I will ask Quetzal, though.
Please, you...
Leave it. Those who do not think also suffer the damage. There is no excuse me.
Then you shouldn't...
Yes, you should, because what I screwed up I also have to own up to.
It is obviously pointless.
It is, so let us not go on about that, because it does not make the porridge any better.
It is obviously, like I said, pointless. Then I will just mention that Asina wants to visit you, which is why she asked me to inquire if it is okay with you.
I am gobsmacked then. Approved, of course. I am delighted, and any time is fine with me, of course. This is a surprise. Never thought I would see her again.
She told me that you impressed her very much and she wants to see you again. She will be very happy if I give her...
There is no question about it, because I am really looking forward to it.
Good. That is also enough for today, because tomorrow we will see each other again and have some things to talk about, as Florena said. Then I also want to go now and...
That is good. See you tomorrow, then.
Unfortunately, that will be the case. Because neither in Ukraine nor in the Middle East will there be peace, and the killing will continue. Because America is in the background of both wars and is intervening in the Middle East only for the sake of peace. Because in its delusion of hegemony addiction, it slyly undermines all the honest endeavors of the part of the Earth's population that really wants peace.
Peace. When a war is ended, peace does not come either way, because occupation comes, which means enmity, and so underground the stink and murder goes on.
Unfortunately, that is the effective truth. And the stupid people who supply weapons or money for it do not see that. But now I really want to go.
Of course, goodbye, Bermunda.
Sprinkles from the correspondence.
From Bernadette Brand, Switzerland. From time to time it happens that questions are asked in the mail correspondence that are actually of general validity and whose answers should be made accessible to a larger circle of people interested in creation energy teaching, because they are often small detailed questions, but which can be decisive for the understanding and continuation of one's own thoughts and considerations, and thus also for the implementation of the teaching and one's own behavior. For this reason, anonymized questions and answers from my mail correspondence will be published in loose succession, with the purpose of providing assistance for those interested or searching who are struggling with the same topic, but do not dare to ask open questions. To all those who doubt my answers or think that I am a special light, let it be said openly that any of my answers are agreed with Billy, or that I submit the questions and my answers to him, and only pass them on with his consent and taking into account further hints or corrections from him.
Questions regarding Nocodemian's consciousness-raising prayers. I have an SEL related.
Question. There are some places in the prayers where negations or negations are used. For example, in the following places, and lead me not into temptation and confusion, but deliver me from error. Do not let me go astray through material and worldly things, and do not let me fall into dependence on faith through false teachings. I have read in the Figu literature that one should not think contrary to a cause, or that one should only focus on what one wants to achieve and not on what one does not want to achieve. The reason for this is that the subconscious mind thinks absolutely logically and therefore does not recognize negations, such as not, no, etc. Consequently, these negations have the exact opposite effect of what you want to communicate to your subconscious. However, these negations appear in the sentences mentioned above. This confuses me. Could you elaborate on why the negations are used in the prayers and whether I may be making a mistake?
Answer. Thank you for your email and the question, which we have of course also struggled with. But it is actually quite simple. Negative formulations should be avoided because human beings need to build up self-motivation so that they can overcome the negative, and that only works through positive thinking. So if a negative statement is made, which is unavoidably, gee, I now have a headache, then this negative statement should be followed by a relevant positive twist or a positive thought, gee, the pain will soon subside. This gives the unconscious complex the ammunition it needs to switch gears correctly and bring about a positive outcome. However, if the negative statement is simply left as it is, the unconscious complex is forced to maintain this negative state. In prayer, you now have the classic formulation of how it should be and how human beings should learn it. So when it says, and lead me not into temptation and confusion, but deliver me from error, you have exactly that the negative situation is stated, including, let me not go astray through material and worldly things, and not fall into addiction of faith through false doctrines. But the positive outcome is postponed or anticipated, so to speak, which gives the unconscious complex the opportunity to switch gears correctly, which also includes naming other negative situations that are related to it. Positive thinking should therefore always be situation-related, as taught in prayer, and not simply generalized, which the unconscious complex cannot do anything with, because a generalized formulation does not contain any precise instructions or logical clues. This is why, for example, the psyche also advises that generalized positive phrases such as, I am fine or I am getting better and better should be avoided, because this virtually cements the negative, which is actually logical, because there are always partial aspects of one's own thinking and feelings that are negative and which are then accepted by the unconscious complex, with the generalized wish or the generalized statement. I am fine as okay, that is to say as a desired state, and consequently realized, which cannot be the point of the matter. Seda.
Question. Thank you for the explanation, which is quite logical. Tuiza, after thinking about it for a while, I now wonder, in relation to your final remark, or the last paragraph of your explanation, why, for example, Positive phrases such as living in love, peace, freedom, and harmony are used in mental block meditation. This is not the case for most human beings. According to your explanation, the negative statement of fact that this is not currently the case would first have to be made in order to avoid triggering a conflict in the psyche or the unconscious complex. Situational sentences should therefore precede the positive meditation sentences so as not to cement any existing negative mental states or accept them as okay. Answer to the further.
Question. It seems to me that you are thinking a little too short. That is to say, not thinking the matter through precisely enough. There is a world of difference between positive thinking, which is what I wrote about, and to which your question also fundamentally referred, unless I have misunderstood you, and meditation. What is indispensable in conscious thinking, because thoughts are always running and always looking for and taking new paths, which have to be channeled through the identification of negative states and then their positive resolution, is completely different in meditation, because in meditation you concentrate exclusively on a goal to be achieved, which should not be thought through in meditation. In this sense, meditation serves to focus on the goal to be achieved, that is to say, to cement it in one's own consciousness, while positive or free thinking then seeks and paves the way to this goal, which can only happen by establishing the facts and aiming for the goal in conscious thought. Meditation addresses those levels of consciousness that have no direct connection with mental states, but are completely neutral, and serve solely to set goals or establish facts, that is to say, to grasp the true inner state, which is always and in any case positive and balanced, even if it is negatively overgrown beyond recognition by unconscious and uncontrolled thinking. Question. Would you please help me briefly with a clarification of terms? It is about the term corpse field in connection with corpse field meditation. In itself, the term is clear, in the sense of field full of corpses. I think, that is to say as a result of a violent event such as war, or a natural disaster such as an earthquake, etc., or simply because corpses have been gathered in a field. Can you briefly confirm or correct this for me? Yesterday I had a conversation with two persons, and it came up, and I had the feeling that the term made me wonder. As a result, I thought I would make sure and ask. As I understand it, corpse field meditation is about realizing that it is so when perceiving the presence of a corpse field. This preserves self-control, without which the perceiving person would probably suffer a mental breakdown at such a sight. In the book Introduction to Meditation, sentence 304, however, there is something that slipped through my fingers earlier. 304, 4, corpse field mindfulness observation. In modern times, corpse field mindfulness observation is no longer possible and is replaced by good human being mindfulness observation, in which specific or randomly selected human beings are observed with meditative mindfulness in their movements, physiognomy, and clothing. If it says that mindfulness of the field of corpses is no longer possible in this day and age, what am I missing? After all, a field of corpses could still come about if you consider everything that happens in this world.
Answer. Your explanation is completely correct in and of itself. However, a field of corpses is no longer possible today because, on the one hand, in the event of war, it would be far too dangerous to stand on a field of corpses, and on the other hand, due to modern weapons, the corpses are often so disfigured that meditative contemplation of the parts of the corpse is no longer possible and would also not be helpful. In addition, in the case of natural disasters, for example, corpses are removed very quickly by the authorities in order to prevent the risk of epidemics and to spare the remaining population the shock that could result from an accumulation of corpses. The viewing of the field of corpses is therefore not a short-term observation, but apparently a longer-term attentive observation, during which the decomposition of the dead bodies is meditatively observed and analyzed.